The Queen embraced the veteran human who saved her as a child. The great hall of the Stellar Accord was filled with light, color, and quiet pride. Delegates from hundreds of worlds stood in perfect lines, their banners floating softly in the air. Crystal pillars reflected the glow of distant stars, and soft music echoed through the chamber. This was a day of celebration, a day of power, a day meant for history. At the very back of the hall stood a human. Marcus Hale kept his hands folded behind his back and his eyes forward. His uniform was clean but old. The fabric had been repaired more than once, and the metal pins on his chest were dull with age. He stood straight, but his shoulders carried the weight of years. His hair was gray now, his face lined with scars that told stories no one had ever asked to hear. To most in the hall, he was invisible. Humans were often like that in the galaxy. Useful, loyal, brave in battle, but rarely remembered once the war ended. They lived short lives compared to most species. Their victories faded quickly, replaced by new conflicts and new heroes. Marcus had learned long ago not to expect anything else. He was here only because protocol demanded a human presence. One retired veteran for show. One quiet symbol of cooperation. The ceremony began as planned. Queen Elthira sat upon her elevated throne of living crystal, her form tall and graceful. Her species lived for centuries, sometimes longer. Her eyes, bright and sharp, had seen generations rise and fall. She was known as a wise ruler, careful and calm, respected across the galaxy. She spoke of peace. She spoke of unity. She spoke of strength built through alliance rather than conquest. The hall listened. Marcus listened too, though his thoughts drifted. Long ceremonies always did that to him. The words blended together, becoming distant echoes. His mind slipped backward in time to places he rarely visited unless sleep dragged him there without permission. Fire, smoke, screaming alarms, he forced himself back to the present. The Queen raised one hand, signaling the end of her speech. The hall prepared for applause, but the applause never came. Instead, Queen Elthira stood. That alone was unusual. She rarely left her throne during public events. A quiet ripple moved through the hall as she stepped down, her long robes flowing behind her. Then she did something no one expected. She walked forward, not toward the center, not toward the honored leaders, not toward the generals or ambassadors. She walked past them. Her steps were slow but steady, each movement deliberate as if she was counting every pace. The music faded. Guards shifted uneasily. Whispers spread like static through the air. Marcus felt it before he understood it. The sudden silence. The strange weight pressing against his chest. He realized with a faint shock that the Queen was walking toward the back of the hall, toward him. Marcus's first thought was that there must be a mistake. Perhaps she meant to address someone near him, a diplomat, an officer. Anyone else? He straightened slightly, eyes fixed ahead, heart beginning to beat faster. The distance closed. 10 steps, 5. She stopped directly in front of him. The entire hall froze. Marcus swallowed. His mind searched for protocol, for something he had forgotten, some rule he had broken. He had done nothing wrong. He was sure of it. But standing before a queen had a way of making doubt grow fast. Slowly, carefully, he knelt. "My queen," he said quietly, his voice rough with age. For a long moment she said nothing. She looked down at him, really looked. At the scars, at the tired eyes, at the hands that had once carried weapons and now trembled just slightly. Then, to the shock of every being present, she reached out. Her hands were warm. She lifted him up. Marcus did not resist. He barely had time to react before she pulled him forward and wrapped her arms around him. The Queen embraced the human veteran. Gasps echoed through the hall. Some delegates stepped back in disbelief. Others leaned forward, stunned. Marcus stood frozen, unsure how to move, how to breathe. Her voice was low when she spoke, meant only for him. "I found you," she said. His heart stuttered. "I promised I would," she continued, "even if it took my whole life." Marcus's mind raced. The words struck something deep, something buried beneath years of memory and pain. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The Queen stepped back, though her hands remained on his arms, as if afraid he might disappear. She turned to face the hall. "This human," she said, her voice now clear and strong, "saved my life." The shock deepened. She began to speak again, and as she did, the hall seemed to fade around Marcus. Her words pulled him backward in time, tearing open a memory he had sealed away long ago. The war had been small by galactic standards, a border conflict, a forgotten name. Few records survived. Fewer still cared. Marcus had been young then, barely trained, fresh armor, hands that shook when he loaded his rifle. The convoy was supposed to be simple. Escort civilians out of a contested city, in and out, nothing ever went that way. The first explosion hit the transport ahead of them. The sky turned orange, the ground shook, screams filled the air, orders came fast and confused, fall back, regroup, leave the zone. Marcus ran, smoke burned his lungs, heat scorched his skin. He moved through fire and debris, helping anyone he saw, pulling bodies from rubble, shouting for survivors. That was when he heard the crying. Small, weak, terrified. He followed the sound into a collapsed building. Inside, hiding beneath broken stone and twisted metal, was a child, not human, small, fragile, wide, glowing eyes filled with fear. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. The orders echoed in his head. Leave the zone, evacuate now. The building shook again, more explosions. Time was running out. The child reached out, that was all it took. Marcus lifted her into his arms. She was light, barely more than a bundle of shaking limbs and sobs. He wrapped her in his jacket, shielding her from the heat and falling ash. He ran. Blasts threw him to the ground, shrapnel tore into his armor. Pain flared, sharp and bright, but he did not stop. He remembered speaking to her as he ran, simple words, calm words, promises he did not know if he could keep. "You're safe," he said. "I've got you." They reached the evacuation point just as the city fell behind them in fire. Marcus collapsed once they were clear. Medics rushed in. Someone took the child from his arms. He never learned her name. He never asked. When he woke later, the war was already moving on. The report listed his actions as non-essential deviation. No medal, no ceremony, just another line buried in a forgotten file. Eventually, even he stopped thinking about it. Back in the present, Marcus realized his eyes were wet. Queen Elthira finished her story. She spoke of the fear she had felt, of the human soldier whose face she remembered through the flames, of the arms that held her when the world was falling apart. She spoke of how that moment shaped her. "How I learned," she said, "that strength is not measured by power alone, but by the choice to protect someone weaker even when it costs everything." The hall was silent. Marcus felt small, overwhelmed. "I did nothing special," he whispered, though he knew no one but her could hear. She turned back to him and smiled softly. "You saved a life," she said. "You saved mine." The moment stretched, heavy with meaning. And in that silence, the galaxy began to understand that it had overlooked something important about humanity. The hall stayed silent long after the Queen finished speaking. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire galaxy had taken one long breath and forgotten how to let it out. Marcus stood there, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes on him. He had faced enemy fire, collapsing cities, and the screams of the wounded, but this was different. This was harder. He did not know where to put his hands. He did not know where to look. All his life, he had learned how to disappear into the background. Now the background had vanished. Queen Elthira turned fully toward the gathered leaders and delegates. Her posture changed. She was no longer only the ruler speaking from tradition. She was the child who had survived, standing beside the man who had saved her. "For decades," she said, "many of you have asked why my empire chose peace with humanity instead of dominance. Why we offered alliance instead of rule. Some believed it was strategy, others believed it was weakness." She paused, letting her gaze travel across the hall. "It was memory." A low murmur spread, quickly silenced by the power in her voice. "When my world burned, when my guards were dead and my future was nothing but fear, it was not a fleet that saved me. It was not a treaty. It was one human soldier who had no reason to care about an alien child." Marcus lowered his eyes. His throat felt tight. He was wounded. "He was afraid, he had orders to leave," the Queen continued, "and still he chose to carry me." She turned back to Marcus again. "This human never asked for reward, never spoke of that day, never even knew who I became." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I just did what anyone should do," he said quietly. The Queen smiled, but there was sadness in it. "That is what makes it matter." The silence broke then, not into applause, but into something deeper. Many stood straighter, some bowed their heads. Even those who had long dismissed humanity felt something shift inside them. Queen Elthira raised one hand. "Marcus Hale," she said, speaking his name clearly for the first time, "step forward." His legs felt heavy, but he obeyed. Each step echoed loudly in his ears. He stood beside her now, no longer hidden at the back of the hall. "You stand here as a veteran of a forgotten war," she said. "But wars are forgotten only by those who survived without cost. I remember." She gestured, and a projection appeared in the air. Old records. Faded images, battle reports long sealed and ignored. There was Marcus, younger, bloodied, carrying a small alien child through smoke and fire. Gasps rippled again through the hall. These records were buried, the Queen said. Not erased, buried. Because compassion does not always fit into military victory reports. Marcus stared at the image. He had not seen that face in years. He barely recognized himself. I have ruled for many decades, Queen Elthira said. Every law I shaped about civilians. Every order I gave to protect the weak. Every alliance I defended when others argued for conquest. She placed a hand over her chest. All of it began there. A representative from one of the larger empires stepped forward carefully. Your Majesty, he said, are you saying your policies were influenced by a single act? The Queen met his gaze without hesitation. Yes, she said, one act, one choice. She turned back to the hall. If one human soldier could show mercy in the middle of chaos, then an empire could do the same with power. The words settled heavily. Marcus felt dizzy. He had never imagined that something so small, so simple, could echo so far. I did not come here today to honor fleets or weapons, the Queen continued. I came to repay a debt. She faced Marcus fully now. You carried me when you could have left me. Today I carry your truth before the galaxy. Slowly she lowered herself. Gasps turned into stunned silence as Queen Elthira knelt. She knelt before a human veteran. Marcus panicked. Please, you don't have to, he began, reaching out. She stopped him gently with a look. This is not submission, she said softly. This is gratitude. Every camera in the hall recorded the moment. The image would spread across worlds within hours. A queen kneeling before a human soldier who never asked to be remembered. I name you, she said, not as a hero of war, but as a guardian of life. The title echoed through the hall, repeated by translators in 100 languages. And by this act, she continued, rising again, I declare a new standing for humanity. The delegates leaned forward. Humanity is no longer a minor ally, the Queen said. They are a guardian species. Wherever humans stand, civilians will be protected. Wherever humans serve, mercy will be law. Some leaders looked uneasy. Others looked thoughtful. None dared interrupt. Marcus felt overwhelmed. My queen, he said quietly, I don't deserve all this. She looked at him with warmth. Deserving has nothing to do with it. She placed a small emblem in his hand. It was simple. No jewels, no gold, just a symbol of open hands. This represents a promise, she said. One you made without knowing it. Marcus closed his fingers around it. I don't want wealth, he said suddenly, his voice stronger now. I don't want power. The hall listened closely. I just want people to remember, he continued. Not me, but what matters. That no child should be left behind, not human, not alien, not ever. The Queen inclined her head. Then your wish aligns with mine. Across the hall, veterans from many species stood without being asked. Old soldiers, scarred survivors. Those who had seen too much and spoken too little. They saluted, not to the Queen, to Marcus. The moment passed like a wave through the hall, quiet and powerful. Later, as the ceremony ended and the delegates slowly departed, Marcus found himself standing alone near one of the tall crystal pillars. His hands still shook slightly. Queen Elthira approached him again, this time without ceremony. You look tired, she said gently. I am, he admitted, but lighter, she nodded. You carried a burden you never named. He looked at her. You became a good ruler, she smiled softly, because you showed me what good looked like. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the stars beyond the hall. I won't live as long as you, Marcus said eventually. I know, she replied, but I think I'm okay with that now, he said, knowing it mattered. It mattered, she said firmly, and it will continue to matter. As Marcus left the hall later that day, he did not walk unnoticed. Beings stepped aside. Some bowed, some simply watched with new eyes, but Marcus did not change his pace. He was still just a human. And that, the galaxy was beginning to understand, was more than enough. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours of the ceremony, images of Queen Elthira kneeling before an aging human veteran appeared on screens across the galaxy. News channels replayed the moment again and again. Commentators argued. Historians searched old records. Veterans watched in silence. For many, it was the first time they had truly looked at a human. Marcus Hale did not watch the broadcasts. He had returned to the small guest quarters provided to him, a quiet place with plain walls and a single window that showed the stars. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding the simple emblem the Queen had given him. Open hands. He turned it slowly between his fingers. For most of his life, he had carried memories that never left him. Faces of those he could not save. Voices that still echoed in his dreams. He had accepted that this was the price of survival. What he had not expected was peace. That night, for the first time in many years, he slept without waking in fear. Across the galaxy, reactions grew stronger with every passing day. Some leaders resisted the Queen's declaration. They questioned the idea of a guardian species. They feared what it might mean if humans were given moral authority rather than raw power. Others, especially smaller worlds, felt hope. On border planets and war-scarred colonies, people remembered human medics who stayed behind when others fled. Human engineers who rebuilt cities they would never live in. Human soldiers who stood their ground not for conquest, but for evacuation time. Stories long ignored were finally being told. Marcus was asked to speak many times. Councils requested his presence. Media outlets begged for interviews. He refused almost all of them. He agreed to only one request, a gathering of veterans. The hall was smaller than the grand chamber of the Accord, but to Marcus it felt heavier. Rows of beings filled the seats, different shapes, sizes, colors, lifespans. Some wore uniforms. Others wore simple clothing. All carried the same look in their eyes. They had survived. Marcus stood at the center, no throne, no banners, no guards. "I'm not a speaker," he said honestly. "I never was." A few quiet sounds of understanding moved through the room. "I didn't save the child because she was important," he continued. "I saved her because she was there." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "In war, we learn to see enemies, targets, objectives," he said. "But the hardest thing to see is the person who needs help when no one is watching." Many heads lowered. "I won't tell you that kindness fixes everything," Marcus said. "It doesn't. War still hurts, loss still stays." He held up the emblem. "But kindness changes what comes after." The room was silent. "You don't have to be remembered," he finished. "You just have to choose." When Marcus stepped down, no applause followed. Instead, veterans rose one by one, touching their fists to their chests, their foreheads, their hearts, each according to their own culture. Respect given freely. Queen Elthira watched from the back, unseen. In the months that followed, changes began to take shape. Human advisors were placed alongside peacekeeping forces, not as commanders but as protectors of civilians. Evacuation laws were rewritten across multiple empires, inspired by the Queen's doctrine. Humanity's military strength did not increase. Their responsibility did. Marcus returned to Earth soon after. He did not want a position. He did not want honors. He asked only to go home. When he arrived, there were no parades, just a small group waiting at the spaceport. Old friends, fellow veterans, a few young soldiers who had only heard stories. They shook his hand, they thanked him. Marcus smiled, a little embarrassed, and went home. He lived quietly after that. He taught when asked. He listened more than he spoke. He visited memorials and left no name, only flowers. Years passed. Slowly, the pain in his joints grew worse. His steps became slower. His hair turned fully white, but something else changed too. The dreams faded. When Marcus passed away, it was in his sleep, peaceful and quiet, under a sky full of stars he had once defended without knowing why. The galaxy noticed. Queen Elthira declared a day of remembrance, not for Marcus Hale alone, but for the unnamed protectors. Across worlds, lights dimmed, weapons were lowered. Children were taught a simple lesson. That strength is not found in how much you can destroy, but in how much you are willing to carry. On a distant world, a frightened child would one day be lifted from danger by another human, and the promise would continue. The galaxy did not forget after Marcus Hale passed away. If anything, memory grew stronger. On worlds far from Earth, schools added new lessons. Not about battles or weapons, but about choices. Children learned about a human soldier who once carried a frightened alien child through fire, and how that single act changed the future of empires. The story was told in many languages and many forms, but the meaning stayed the same. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Queen Elthira grew older, though age touched her kind slowly. She often stood alone on the balcony of her palace, looking out at the stars. In her private chambers, she kept only one personal item on display, a small, worn human jacket, carefully preserved. It was the same jacket Marcus had wrapped around her long ago. When advisors asked why she kept something so simple, she always gave the same answer. "Because it reminds me who I must be." Years after Marcus's death, a new crisis rose. A distant region of space fell into chaos after the collapse of a powerful regime. Worlds that had once been protected were suddenly exposed. Refugees filled the space lanes. Pirates and warlords moved in quickly, seeing opportunity in fear. The Galactic Council argued for weeks. Some wanted military action, some wanted isolation, others wanted to wait and see. Queen Elthira listened, then she spoke. "Send the Guardians!" The title no longer surprised anyone. Human-led protection fleets mixed with allied species moved out. Their ships were not the largest, their weapons were not the strongest, but their mission was clear. Secure evacuation routes, protect civilian centers, hold ground only long enough for people to escape. On one such world, a young human officer named Alina Cross led a small unit into a ruined city. Smoke filled the air. Buildings leaned at dangerous angles. Sirens wailed in the distance. Her orders were simple: get the civilians out. As her team moved through the streets, explosions rocked nearby blocks. Debris fell from above. Fear pressed in from all sides. Then Alina heard it. Crying, she froze for half a second. Her squad leader shouted for her to keep moving. The extraction window was closing. Time was running out, but Alina turned. She followed the sound into a damaged shelter. Inside, beneath a broken support beam, was a child from a local species, small, injured, terrified. For a moment, Alina remembered the story she had learned as a child. Not as a legend, but as a lesson, she lifted the beam. Pain shot through her arms. She gritted her teeth and did not stop. She carried the child out as the building collapsed behind them. Later, when asked why she risked the mission, Alina answered simply, "Because someone once did the same." Across the galaxy, moments like this repeated, not always with humans, sometimes with those who had learned from them. A trader gave up cargo space to take refugees. A pilot turned back into danger to retrieve a stranded family. A soldier shielded a stranger with their own body. None of them became famous, that was the point. On Earth, Marcus Hale's name slowly faded from public attention. Streets were not renamed. Statues were not built. Instead, something quieter happened. Veterans spoke more openly. Pain was shared instead of hidden. Young soldiers were trained not only in combat but in care. Medics were given higher authority. Evacuation drills were treated as seriously as battle plans. Humanity did not become rulers, they became anchors. Queen Elthira, now near the later years of her long life, called for one final address to the galaxy. She stood before the same grand hall where everything had changed long ago. The hall was full again, but the feeling was different. Less pride, more understanding. "I will not be here forever," she said calmly. "None of us will." She looked out over the gathered leaders. "But what we leave behind matters." She spoke of Marcus Hale not as a hero but as a reminder. "He did not know who I was," she said. "He did not know what I would become. He only knew that I was afraid." Her voice softened. "The future is shaped by moments like that." She stepped away from the podium and left the hall without ceremony. When Queen Elthira passed away years later, her final request surprised many. No tomb, no monument. Only this inscription shared across the galaxy: "I lived because someone carried me." Far away under a quiet sky, a child looked up at the stars and felt a strange sense of safety they could not explain. The promise endured, not written in law alone, but in choice. And so humanity's greatest legacy was not strength, or victory, or power. It was the simple act of refusing to walk away.